Okay, is this working all right? Can you hear me back there? Okay. Well, thanks for coming here tonight, and thanks to the Fellowship of Christian Athletes and the UMD Secular Humanist Association for co-sponsoring this event, and thanks to the Lake Superior Freethinkers for helping to promote it. Special thanks to Jim Quince for doing the lion's share of setting this up, to my opponent John Kaus, and to Judge Sean Flaherty for moderating. The topic of tonight's debate is, can we be good without God? How's it working there? We'll see. This is too easy. All I have to do is come up with one atheist who's good, and I win the debate. But even if I did that, I might hear the claim that atheist is somehow borrowing from a God belief that's prevalent in society, or that has been prevalent in society in the past. So tonight I intend to show that not only can we be good without God, but that is our only option. We cannot be good with God except by accident or by applying secular ethics to God beliefs. The question that is raised in this debate is, do ethics come from a supernatural God, or do they come from a natural source? Let's take a look at the God side of the equation first. Right away, we're faced with something that's called the Euthyphro dilemma. Is something good simply because a God says it's good? This is also known as divine command. In that case, what is good is arbitrary and would depend on the whim of a God. Not only that, but a God could change his mind. How are we supposed to keep track of what a God says is moral if he can change his mind at any moment? Or does a God say that something is good because it's objectively good? In that case, God is only the messenger, and there might be some other way we could use to find out what is objectively good. Well, let's say we're seeking moral guidance, and someone says, just turn to God. Well, right away we have a problem. What is a God? What is a God composed of? What is spirit? We know what spirit isn't. It isn't matter and energy as we know it, but we don't know what spirit is. How many gods are there? Where are these gods located? Whose gods, if any, are the real God? So we know nothing about the essence of God, or where they're located, or how many there are, or which gods, if any gods, are the true gods. How you picture your God can affect your views on morality. In their new book entitled America's Four Gods, researchers Paul Frois and Christopher Bader found that Americans who believe in an authoritative God are about 3 times more likely to say that homosexuality is a choice and not an inborn trait than those who believe in a distant God. This affects people's views on gay rights, particularly marriage, adoption, service in the military. The problem is that we don't know if God is authoritative, distant, or non-existent. The next question we face is, what mechanism does a God use to give us moral instruction? Does a God put a moral instinct directly into our brains, perhaps at birth? Or does a God tell us what is moral with words, perhaps through a spoken or written revelation? Well, let's look at the idea that a God gives us an intuitive moral sense. Okay, how does this happen? Exactly how, what mechanism does a God use to poke inside our brains and rearrange the atoms, chemicals, and neurons to give us a sense of morality that we supposedly would otherwise lack? Does a God use invisible fingers to do his rewiring? It just seems absurd on the face of it. And why does this God seem to give a different moral sense to different people? Religious people have sincere disagreements, even within the same religion, backed by the belief in a God, about such things as masturbation, premarital sex, contraception, abortion, embryonic stem cell research, divorce, the role of women, gay rights, the death penalty, voluntary euthanasia, and when and if we should go to war. When a God reaches into our brains with his invisible magic fingers and does his rewiring to give us a moral intuition, it seems that he's either inconsistent or incompetent. So God-given moral intuition is unverifiable, contradictory, and untrustworthy. Well, maybe God has some other mechanism to let us know what's right and wrong. Does a God speak directly to us using words through a revelation? If so, he seems to give different people different instructions. How can we tell which revelation is the true revelation? How can we tell the difference between a revelation and a hallucination? How many times have we heard people claim that they were acting on orders from a God? And would we really want to follow these people? Susan B. Anthony stated, "I distrust those people who know so well what God wants them to do, because I notice it always coincides with their own desires." There's another downside to God belief: gullibility. Think of all the scam email letters that you get. How many of them start with a phrase like, "Dear beloved in Christ," or contain other pleadings in the name of God? Once you drop your critical standards and start believing in invisible beings, you're liable to believe in anything. Well, maybe a God has given us some written instructions. Unfortunately, we don't seem to have anything that was written by the actual hand or any other appendage of a God. There's no holy book in existence that I'm aware of for which it is claimed that it was not written by a human. This brings up the problem of revelation that we just talked about. We have many people from many religions who claim to speak and write for God. We have a lot of holy books in existence. How do we determine which one, if any, is the true revelation from a God? I don't have time tonight to look at all the religions, so let's focus on Christianity. I have no reason to believe that Christianity is any more true than any other religion, but it's the religion most people in America believe in. The source of Christianity is the Bible. So let's take a look at something I think we would all agree is morally wrong: killing children, especially innocent children, and see what the Bible has to say about it. Let's take a look at how the character of God treats children in the Bible. In the Bible, it is recorded that God personally engages in the mass slaughter of children. Women too, but that's another story. The mass slaughter of children. The first time is when he drowns practically everyone on earth in a great flood, which would have included children. A second time is when he wipes out all the inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah, which would have included children. And the third time was when he kills all the firstborn children of Egypt as part of the Exodus story. When the biblical God is not busy killing children on a large scale, he kills them on a small scale. In 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 23 to 24, we read about a group of children who had teased one of God's prophets for being bald. How does God react to this? He sends 2 female bears from out of the woods to tear up 42 of the children. The biblical God not only kills children himself, but he orders humans to do the same. In Numbers chapter 31, verses 17 to 18, we read how Moses, acting on orders from God, tells the Israelites to kill all the Midianite men, and then proceed to, quote, "kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman who has known a man intimately. But all the girls who have not known man intimately, spare for yourselves." In that passage, the biblical God was being generous, I suppose, by stating that only the male children should be killed and the virgin girls should be kept alive so they could be raped. God is not so generous elsewhere when he orders the Israelites to wipe out entire villages and destroy all the inhabitants, or to kill all those who worship another god. In both cases, this would include children. This occurs in Deuteronomy chapters 7 and 13, in Exodus 22, verse 20, and in 1 Samuel chapter 15, verses 2 and 3. In Exodus 21:17, God says to kill anyone who curses his father and mother. In Deuteronomy 21:18 to 21, God says to kill rebellious sons. In addition to killing children, the biblical God orders that the following people be killed: people who curse or blaspheme the Lord, people who worship another god, witches and wizards, non-virgin brides, gay men, and someone who works on the Sabbath. Most of the 10 Commandments in the Bible would be unconstitutional if we tried to enact them into law. Many of them violate freedom of religion, freedom of speech, or freedom of thought. Furthermore, the biblical punishment for violating many of these commandments is the death penalty, putting the Bible at odds with our constitutional guarantee against cruel and unusual punishment. As Isaac Asimov stated, properly read, the Bible is the most potent force for atheism ever conceived. Now, some Christians will say but that was the Old Testament God, Jehovah. The New Testament God, Jesus, is a really nice God. But isn't Jesus supposed to be the same God as the Old Testament God? Does this God change his mind? If so, then we're back to the Euthyphro dilemma. How are we supposed to keep track of whom we're supposed to kill? The fact that this God at any time acted so immorally as to kill innocent children and to order that they be killed means he is an immoral God. And if Jesus is not the same God as the Old Testament Jehovah, then we have two different gods, and we no longer have monotheism. Then we have the problem of deciding which God is the real God. And the real God may not be the one we like the best. Of course, there are other parts of the Bible that advocate the things that we would agree are ethical. But then we're pitting the good part of the Bible against the bad part. We are picking and choosing, deciding that some of God's actions are okay and some aren't, and deciding to obey some religious commandments and not others. And on what basis are we doing this? How do we know which is the good part and which is the bad part of the Bible? On what basis do we decide that it's really not okay to kill people who work on the Sabbath, gay people, non-virgin brides, and disobedient sons, etc.? Since a God is proclaiming both the good and the bad parts of the Bible, it must be something other than a God that we're using to identify the bad parts. The truth is, we can differentiate the good parts of the Bible from the bad parts because we're bringing our own natural, secular, outside the Bible morality to bear on the Bible. So to conclude, first section anyway, we have no idea what a God is, how many of them exist, how they communicate with humans, who speaks for God, and why God's messages are so contradictory and confusing. And when we look at one group of people who claim to speak for God, Christians, we get contradictions, confusion, and a God that is a bad ethical model. In the end, we have to bring our own sense of ethics to bear on the Bible to determine which parts to focus on and which parts to ignore. For these reasons, it is impossible to base our ethics on God belief. Well, what about the argument that religion or God beliefs may not be true, but they're still useful as a tool? Well, it's true that belief in an unseen being who rewards you for good behavior can indeed motivate good behavior. He sees you when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awake, he knows if you've been bad or good, be good for goodness sake. Lawrence Kohlberg describes 6 stages of moral development. The lowest level of moral development is how can I avoid punishment? This corresponds with a religious fear of divine punishment, such as a plague, a drought, or hell after we die. The next lowest level of moral development is what's in it for me. This corresponds to a religious hope for a reward from a God, such as a good harvest or heaven after we die. So fear and reward can work to motivate people, but they are our most primitive moral tools. At the other end of the Kohlberg moral scale is the conscious attempt to develop universal ethical